The sun was setting in Brighton, the county seat of East Sussex, as the Justice Rodolfo Aurelian Courthouse in the Joanna Bay Island neighbourhood remained bustling. In the imposing jury room, Justice Anthony Herculane, known for his intransigence, adjusted the position of his wheelchair. 15 years ago, after an accident, he had lost the use of his legs, and along with it, part of his compassion. The case on trial was that of Francis Taylor, an artisan from the Pinehaven community, accused of robbing a neighbourhood pharmacy. The evidence seemed compelling. Grainy camera footage showing someone of similar build, identification by witnesses, and Francis's cell phone registered near the location at the time of the crime. In the first row of the gallery, Mary Ann, Francis's 7-year-old daughter, watched everything in silence. Her simple dress, sewn from colourful scraps bought at the Coldwater Market, betrayed the family's precarious financial situation. Her large dark eyes, inherited from her father, followed every movement in the courtroom with an unusual maturity for her age. The County of East Sussex Prosecutor's Office is convinced, Your Honour, that the evidence is irrefutable, declared Prosecutor Dr. Gustav Menzies, adjusting his tie and casting a victorious glance at Francis. The defendant was caught near the crime scene, was identified by 2 witnesses, and presented no convincing alibi. The court-appointed lawyer for Francis, Dr. Mark Ferris, seemed disinterested. He leafed through documents without enthusiasm, as if he already considered the case lost. My client vehemently denies the accusations, Your Honour. He is a single father, a respected artisan in the neighbourhood, and has no criminal record. That night he was at home caring for his sick daughter. Justice Herculane observed the defendant with cold eyes. In 15 years of paraplegia, his bitterness had transformed into systematic distrust. To him, most accused individuals lied, and Francis seemed no different. Any document to prove this alibi? Asked the judge with thinly disguised irony. Unfortunately, we couldn't gather documentary evidence, Your Honour. Only the testimony of his minor daughter and some neighbours who couldn't attend, replied the lawyer, demonstrating his unpreparedness. Francis, seated in the defendant's dock, maintained an upright posture, but his trembling hands betrayed his nervousness. He occasionally looked at Mary Ann, trying to convey confidence with a timid smile. Mr. Taylor, the judge began, the evidence against you is significant. We have identification from 2 people, camera footage and records of your cell phone in the area. Do you maintain your version that you were at home? Yes, Your Honour, Francis replied, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. My daughter had a high fever that night. I didn't leave the house for a minute. There must have been a mistake. The prosecutor shook his head, disbelieving. A mistake by the witnesses? A mistake by the camera? A mistake by the phone record? Those are a lot of mistakes, don't you think, Mr. Defendant? Francis lowered his eyes. I just know I didn't commit this crime. Justice Herculane consulted his files, took a sip of water and adjusted his glasses. The room was completely silent, except for the occasional hum of the old air conditioning. Well, I believe we have enough elements for a verdict, the judge announced. Before that, however, as is customary, I ask if anyone else wishes to speak. It was at that moment that Mary Ann stood up. Small for her age, she had to stretch as much as possible to be seen. Her childlike voice, however, sounded clear and determined. I want to speak, Your Honour. Murmurs rippled through the room. Justice Herculane, surprised, frowned. It was not common for children to speak in trials. Child, this is no place for games, he warned. I'm not playing, Mary Ann replied, with a seriousness that silenced everyone. My dad is innocent. He was with me that night. I was sick, the prosecutor interrupted. Your Honour, this is clearly an attempt at emotional manipulation using a child. I ask that you disregard it. Your Honour, Mary Ann continued, ignoring the prosecutor, if you let my dad go today, I'll make you walk again. An astonished silence dominated the courtroom for a few seconds, followed by suppressed laughter and jocular comments. Francis looked at his daughter, shocked. Mary Ann, please sit down, he pleaded. Justice Herculane, initially surprised, regained his composure and smiled bitterly. Is this emotional blackmail, child? No, sir, Mary Ann replied without hesitation. It's a promise. The judge pounded his gavel, irritated. This is a court, not a miracle center. I will allow 2 minutes for this demonstration. just so it's clear to everyone that justice does not bend to theatrics. The girl walked with determined steps to the judge's bench. Francis tried to stop her with his gaze, but she continued. The bailiff made a move to stop her, but Justice Herculane, intrigued and wanting to expose what he considered a farce, allowed her to approach. Mary Ann stood before the magistrate's wheelchair. Small, she barely reached the man's knees. Without asking permission, she knelt and placed her small hands on the judge's inert legs. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, disconcerted. "I'm praying," she replied simply, closing her eyes. The room oscillated between laughter and embarrassment. The prosecutor rolled his eyes. The defense lawyer seemed mortified. Francis watched the scene, torn between pride and worry. Mary Ann murmured almost inaudible words, a prayer that mixed naive requests with unwavering faith. Her lips moved rapidly, while her hands remained firm on the judge's legs. Justice Herculane looked at his watch, counting the seconds. "Your time is running out, child," he said with a scoff. Mary Ann opened her eyes, looked at him seriously, and said, "Now you need to try." "Try what?" he asked. "To stand up." Laughter echoed through the room. The judge shook his head, exasperated. "Enough of this nonsense. Bailiff, please take the girl back to her seat." The bailiff approached, but before he could touch Mary Ann, Justice Herculane felt something strange. A subtle tingling in his legs, something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. His face paled. The tingling in Justice Herculane's legs intensified, followed by a sensation of warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. However, he maintained his composure, ignoring what he considered a psychosomatic reaction induced by the emotionally charged situation. "Order in the court!" he boomed, pounding the gavel forcefully. "This farce is over. Bailiff, take the girl to her seat." As the bailiff escorted Mary Ann back to the gallery, the judge recomposed himself and prepared to announce his decision. Francis's face reflected a mixture of despair and resignation, aware that his fate was sealed. "In view of the evidence presented," Justice Herculane began, his grave voice echoing through the hall, "this court finds Francis Taylor guilty of the charge of armed robbery. The sentence will be 15 years of incarceration in a maximum security facility, without the right to parole for the first 5 years." A murmur of consternation rippled through the room. Mary Ann, seated in the first row, let silent tears roll down her face. Francis lowered his head, devastated, but when his eyes met his daughter's, he tried to smile to comfort her. "Daddy will be okay," he whispered, as police officers handcuffed him. "Be strong, my love." Mary Ann watched helpless as her father was led out of the courtroom. Before he crossed the door, the girl cried out, "I love you, Daddy. I'll wait for you." The phrase echoed through the hall, drawing sympathetic glances from some of those present. Justice Herculane, however, remained impassive. To him it was just another case closed, another criminal removed from the streets. When everyone had left the courtroom, the judge remained in his chair, organizing papers. It was then that he felt the tingling in his legs again, now more intense, accompanied by a pulsing sensation, as if blood was flowing more vigorously through long dormant limbs. "It's not possible," he murmured to himself. Moved by an inexplicable impulse, Justice Herculane placed his hands on the arms of his wheelchair and tried to push himself up. To his surprise and astonishment, his feet touched the cold marble floor and, for a fleeting instant, he managed to stand upright, supporting his own weight on his legs. It was only 5 seconds, but enough to destabilize all his certainties. When he collapsed back into the chair, sweat was trickling down his forehead and his heart was beating erratically. "Coincidence," he said aloud, trying to convince himself. "Muscle spasm, nothing more." But as he was driven by his chauffeur to his mansion in the Stronghold Estate neighborhood, Justice Herculane couldn't shake the thought of little Mary Ann, of her warm hands on his inert legs, of her seemingly absurd promise. The night was tumultuous. The judge tossed and turned in bed, alternating between nightmares and moments of lucidity, where he questioned his own sanity. In one dream he saw himself standing, walking through the courthouse corridors, while Mary Ann's childlike voice echoed, "It's a promise." At dawn, he made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew his reputation for inflexibility. He would find the girl. He needed to understand what had happened, or definitively convince himself that it was all just a coincidence. 3 days had passed since the trial. Justice Herculane, using his influence, discovered that Mary Ann had been sent to St. Clair's shelter in the St. Amory neighborhood, as she had no other close relatives who could care for her. The shelter occupied an old mansion, a remnant of Brighton's historic architecture. When the judge's wheelchair crossed the entrance gate, several children were playing in the inner courtyard under the supervision of volunteers. One of them, recognizing the distinguished visitor, hurried to greet him. "Justice Herculane, what an unexpected honor," the woman greeted him, introducing herself as Sister Conception, the shelter coordinator. "How can we help you?" "I came to see one of the children," he replied, feeling strangely out of place in that environment. "Mary Ann Taylor." Sister Conception's smile faded slightly. "Ah, yes, Mr. Francis's daughter. She arrived a few days ago, still adapting. She's quite distressed, as you can imagine." "I understand," said the judge, maintaining a formal tone, "but I need to speak with her." Sister Conception hesitated for a moment, but knew she couldn't deny the request of an authority of that caliber. "I'll call her. Please, you can wait in the visiting room." Justice Herculane was led to a simple room with donated furniture and walls decorated with children's drawings. He felt uncomfortable, not only because of the hard chair where he positioned his wheelchair, but mainly because of the guilt that began to insinuate itself into his conscience. Minutes later, the door opened and Mary Ann entered, accompanied by Sister Conception. The girl wore the shelter's uniform, a white t-shirt and a simple blue skirt. Her eyes, once lively, now seemed dull with sadness. "Hello?" "Mary Ann," the judge greeted, trying to soften his habitually severe voice. The girl looked at him without surprise, as if she had already expected his visit. "Hello, Your Honor." Sister Conception left them alone, not without first casting a worried glance at the girl. When the door closed, an awkward silence filled the room. "Do you know why I came here?" Justice Herculane finally asked. Mary Ann nodded. "You were able to stand up, weren't you?" The question, asked so naturally, disconcerted the judge. "How do you know that?" "I don't know," she replied, shrugging. "But I asked with great faith." Justice Herculane adjusted himself in his chair, restless. It was only for a few seconds. Probably a muscle spasm. "It was just a test," Mary Ann said with the same seriousness she had shown in court. "For you to believe." "Believe in what, child?" "That my dad is innocent." The judge sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "Mary Ann, justice doesn't work based on miracles. There is evidence against your father. But it's not true evidence," she insisted. "Someone wanted to harm my dad. And how do you know that?" The girl approached and, without asking permission, sat in the chair next to the judge. From a small bag she carried, she pulled out a pink USB drive decorated with children's stickers. "What is this?" Justice Herculane asked. "These are the proofs you need to see," Mary Ann replied. "My dad was at home with me that night. I had a very high fever. He didn't leave for a minute." The judge took the USB drive, intrigued. "Where did this come from?" "My dad has a security camera at home," she explained. "It's a very simple, cheap one. He installed it after they tried to steal his artisan tools. The camera shows everything that happened that night." "And why wasn't this presented at the trial?" "My dad's lawyer tried," Mary Ann replied, with surprising maturity for her 7 years. "But Detective Inspector Stone said it was an invalid recording, that it could have been manipulated. He didn't even want to look properly." Justice Herculane twirled the small device between his fingers thoughtfully. 15 years as a judge had taught him that the system didn't always work as it should. Police officers cut corners. Prosecutors ignored evidence that contradicted their theories. Court-appointed lawyers often didn't try hard enough for their assigned clients. "I'll look into this," he promised, without really committing. "But don't get your hopes up, Mary Ann. The judicial process is complex. Will you help my dad?" The girl's voice trembled slightly, revealing the vulnerability behind her apparent strength. The judge hesitated. "I will look at the evidence. If there are grounds for review, we will follow legal procedures." Mary Ann stood up and, surprising the magistrate, placed her small hand over his. "Thank you, Your Honor. I knew you were a good person." Those simple words struck Justice Herculane with unexpected force. How long had it been since someone saw goodness in him? Since the accident that confined him to a wheelchair, he had cultivated a reputation for severity, as if bitterness were a necessary armor. Upon leaving the shelter, He promised Sister Conception that he would keep in touch about Mary Ann's case. On the way back home, he instructed his chauffeur to make a detour to the courthouse. It was already night when Justice Herculane settled into his private chambers, an imposing space overlooking the River Ouse. He connected the USB drive to the computer, suspicious, expecting to find a corrupted file or an amateur attempt to create an alibi. To his surprise, the file opened without problems. It was a simple black and white low-quality recording showing the modest living room of Francis's house. The timestamp indicated 8:17 p.m. on April 12th, exactly the night of the pharmacy robbery, which had occurred at 8:45 p.m. In the video, Francis entered the frame carrying a girl in his arms, Mary Ann, evidently feverish, with a red face and a limp body. He placed her on the sofa, took her temperature with a thermometer, and visibly worried, picked up the phone. The recording had audio, of poor quality, but enough to hear Francis calling someone, apparently his boss at the artisan shop. "Hi, Mr. Clarence, it's Francis. Yes, I won't be able to open the shop tomorrow. Mary Ann has a high fever, 103.1 degrees. Yes, I've given her antipyretics, but I'm worried. No, I have no one to leave her with. Okay, thanks for understanding." Over the next few hours, the recording showed Francis constantly by his daughter's side, applying cold compresses, offering medicine, telling stories to distract her. At several moments, the child's cough and the lullabies her father sang to calm her were clearly audible. At 8:45 p.m., the exact time of the registered robbery about 2 miles away, Francis was in the kitchen preparing tea, perfectly visible in the recording. Justice Herculane watched the recording 3 times, looking for inconsistencies, cuts, any sign of manipulation. He found nothing. How was this not considered? He murmured to himself. Moved by a growing unease, the judge accessed the tribunal's internal system and reviewed the entire case against Francis. The police reports, especially those signed by Detective Inspector Robert Stone, now seemed suspicious in his eyes. The witness identification had been made under questionable circumstances. The pharmacy camera image was so grainy, it could have been practically any man of similar height and build to Francis. As for the cell phone record nearby, the justice noticed something that had gone unnoticed. The cell phone tower that picked up the signal covered not only the pharmacy area, but also the neighborhood where Francis's house was located. The defendant could have been at home, as he claimed, and still had his cell phone registered by that tower. "My God," the judge whispered, feeling a growing weight in his chest. What if he really is innocent? The night advanced as Justice Herculane rummaged through files, called contacts in the judicial system, and requested additional information. His chambers, once organized, transformed into a chaos of papers and notes. Around 3 in the morning, the judge found something that chilled his blood, a note in a previous case involving Detective Inspector Stone, an accusation of evidence manipulation that had been dismissed for lack of evidence, but which had left a stain on the officer's reputation. Delving deeper into this line of investigation, the justice discovered more. Detective Inspector Stone had been transferred twice in the last 5 years, always after complaints of improper procedures. He had never been formally punished, but the pattern was undeniable. The judge ran his fingers through his grey hair, feeling increasingly disturbed. As an experienced magistrate, he had always believed in his ability to discern the truth in the cases he judged. Now that confidence was shaken. When morning came, Justice Herculane had not slept. His red eyes were fixed on the computer screen, where he had spent the night gathering information. Beside him, a cup of cold coffee bore witness to his obstinacy. His cell phone rang. It was Sister Conception from the shelter. "Justice, forgive me for disturbing you so early," she said, sounding worried. "It's about Mary Ann. She didn't sleep all night. Asking if you had seen the video yet. I'm worried about her emotional state." The judge sighed. "Tell her I saw the video and that I'm working on the case. That will reassure her, I'm sure," the nun replied. After a pause, she added, "Justice, I know it's not my place to question, but that girl has an unwavering faith in you. Since she arrived, she keeps repeating that you will help her father because you saw the truth." Sister Conception's words echoed in the judge's mind long after he hung up the phone. Saw the truth. Was that what was happening? Was he finally seeing the truth that his bitterness had obscured? That morning, Justice Herculane made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew his reputation. He would personally request the reopening of Francis Taylor's eye case, but first he needed more evidence. He then remembered something Mary Ann had mentioned. Detective Inspector Stone said it was an invalid recording. If the detective had seen the recording and deliberately dismissed it, that constituted obstruction of justice. The judge needed to confirm this information. Using his authority, he called a meeting with Dr. Mark Ferris, the court-appointed lawyer who had represented Francis. The man arrived at the justice's chambers visibly nervous, fearing repercussions for his mediocre performance in the case. Dr. Ferris, the judge began, without mincing words, I want to know exactly what happened with the evidence presented by the defense in the Taylor case, specifically a security recording from the defendant's residence. The lawyer paled. Your Honor, I tried to include that evidence. I really tried, but Detective Inspector Stone said it was inadmissible, that the camera wasn't certified, that the material could have been tampered with. And you accepted that? The justice's voice was sharp as a blade. Without questioning, without bringing it to the court's attention. I mentioned it in the process, Your Honor. It is recorded in the files that we tried to present a video as an alibi. But the detective is not the judge of the case. Justice Herculane thundered, pounding his hand on the table. Your obligation was to insist, Doctor. To do your job. The lawyer lowered his eyes, embarrassed. You're right, Your Honor. I should have been more emphatic. But Detective Inspector Stone is, well, he has a certain influence in the department. And I'm just a court-appointed lawyer with dozens of cases. And that justifies letting an innocent man be convicted? Justice Herculane felt indignation growing within him. He couldn't say if he was more furious with the lawyer, with the detective, or with himself for not having noticed the inconsistencies during the trial. The court-appointed lawyer seemed to shrink in his chair. Your Honor, I really believed you would notice the flaws in the prosecution's evidence during the trial. You have always been so... So what, Doctor? The judge challenged. So meticulous, the lawyer completed, carefully choosing his words. But that day, you seemed different, more impatient. The words hit the justice like a punch to the gut. It was true. That specific day marked exactly 15 years since the accident that had put him in a wheelchair. 15 years since he had lost not only the use of his legs but also his wife, who could not bear the new reality and abandoned him months later. That's no excuse, the judge finally replied, more to himself than to the lawyer. Justice cannot depend on the mood of those who administer it. Dismissing Dr. Ferris, Justice Herculane dedicated himself to meticulously analyzing the entire process. Something deeply bothered him. Why would Detective Inspector Stone be so intent on incriminating Francis Taylor? The answer began to emerge when the judge accessed previous records. 2 years earlier, Francis had filed a complaint against Detective Inspector Stone for violent conduct during an operation in the Pine Haven community. The complaint had been dismissed, like so many others against police officers, but it had created friction between the two. Revenge, Justice murmured to himself. Would the detective be capable of fabricating evidence for personal revenge? That afternoon, the judge made an unusual decision. He would personally go to the Fairview precinct, where Detective Inspector Stone worked, to confront him directly. It was a risky move which could alert the officer, but Justice Herculane felt that time was essential. Francis Taylor had already been for almost a week at the Blackwater Penitentiary, a prison known for its precarious conditions. His arrival at the precinct caused a stir. It was not common to see a justice of the East Sussex High Court visiting a police station personally, especially in his wheelchair. Detective Inspector Stone, a corpulent man with a thick mustache and small restless eyes, received him with thinly disguised suspicion. "To what do I owe the honor, Justice?" he asked, offering coffee that the judge refused with a gesture. "I am reviewing the Taylor case," Justice Herculane replied, carefully observing the detective's reaction. "Inconsistencies have arisen. That need to be clarified." Stone's mustache trembled slightly, but his voice remained controlled. "Inconsistencies. The case seemed quite clear to me. Witnesses' video cell phone location. Taylor is guilty. There is a recording from the accused's residence that indicates the opposite," the judge said, getting straight to the point. A recording that you apparently examined and dismissed without bringing it to the court's attention. The detective shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. Ah, that homemade recording. It was clearly a fabrication, Your Honor. Anyone with basic computer knowledge could have altered the date, the content. It had no probative value. That would be for the court to decide, not for you. The detective's eyes hardened. With all due respect, Justice, my job is to filter what is or isn't relevant to the investigation. If we were to take into account all the alibi attempts that criminals invent, did Francis Taylor have a record? The judge interrupted. No, but any connection to organized crime? Not that we found, but any concrete benefit he would gain by robbing a pharmacy? Detective Inspector Stone began to show irritation. Your Honor, since when do we need an elaborate reason for a robbery? Most of these criminals act on impulse, out of necessity. A single father with no record, with a steady job, would abandon his sick daughter to rob a pharmacy 2 miles from home, where he could easily be recognized. The justice maintained a calm tone, but his words were incisive. Doesn't that seem unlikely to you, Detective? The evidence speaks for itself, the officer replied dryly, and with all due respect, you have already given your verdict. The case is closed. It was at this moment that Justice Herculane played his decisive card. I am officially reopening the case, Detective, and requesting an investigation into the conduct of the police inquiry, specifically regarding the evidence that was ignored. Color drained from Stone's face. You can't do that. Not only can I, but I must. It is my duty to correct any miscarriage of justice that has occurred under my jurisdiction. The judge adjusted his position in his wheelchair, staring firmly at the detective. Or is there a personal reason why you are so determined to keep Francis Taylor imprisoned? The veiled mention of the old complaint made the detective even paler. I don't know what you're talking about. I believe you do, the justice replied, taking from his pocket a copy of the complaint Francis had filed against Stone 2 years earlier. And I suspect this significantly influenced your conduct of this case. The detective stood up abruptly, his chair scraping on the floor with a shrill noise. That's absurd. A baseless accusation. I have enough evidence to initiate a formal investigation, the judge declared, imperturbable. Unless, of course, you prefer to cooperate now, clarifying exactly what happened with that recording and why it was discarded. The direct confrontation was a calculated risk. Justice Herculane knew he could be exposing himself to retaliation, but his determination to correct the error he had made outweighed any concern for his own safety. Detective Inspector Stone, cornered, opted for a diplomatic exit. I will need to consult my superiors and the case material. If there was any misunderstanding with the evidence, it will certainly be clarified. You have 48 hours, Detective, the judge replied, turning his chair towards the door. After that, the investigation will proceed through official channels. Upon leaving the precinct, Justice Herculane felt that strange tingling in his legs again. Lighter this time, but undeniably present. He ignored the sensation, focusing on the next step, visiting Francis Taylor in prison. The Blackwater Penitentiary was located about 30 miles from Brighton, on an island connected to the mainland by a bridge. The prison, old and overcrowded, was known for its precarious conditions and internal control exercised by criminal factions. The visit of a justice caused strangeness among the prison guards, who hurried to provide a suitable room for the meeting. Francis Taylor was brought in handcuffed, appearing tired and apprehensive. When the guards withdrew, leaving them alone, the artisan looked at the judge with a mixture of surprise and distrust. "Is my daughter okay?" was the first question he asked. "Yes," Justice Herculane replied, moved by the father's concern. "She is at St. Clair's shelter. It's a good place, well cared for." Francis nodded, relieved. "What do you want from me? Wasn't the conviction enough?" "I came to apologize," the judge said, surprising the prisoner, "and to inform you that I am reopening your case." Francis's eyes widened with hope, but soon narrowed with suspicion. "Why, what changed?" "Your daughter gave me the video from your home security camera," the justice explained. "The one Detective Inspector Stone refused to include in the process." "And you believed it?" "After having ignored everything I said in court." The judge looked at the floor, embarrassed. "I was wrong, Mr. Taylor. I let my personal bitterness influence my judgment. I didn't give due attention to the case. Francis observed the judge intently, as if trying to see the truth behind his words. His days in prison had been brutal. As an artisan with no connections to crime, he had become an easy target for intimidation. And what happens now? He finally asked. I will request your immediate transfer to house arrest while we review the case, Justice Herculane explained. The evidence I found already justifies this measure. In parallel, I am gathering material to annul the sentence and prove your innocence. A tear rolled down Francis's tired face. Marianne, she's special, isn't she? She managed to do what I couldn't. Open your eyes. The judge hesitated, unsure how to address what had happened in court. Your daughter has an extraordinary faith. Always has, Francis confirmed with a shy smile, since she was little. After her mother, he interrupted himself, unable to pronounce the word. After it was just the two of us, her faith seems to have grown even more. May I ask what happened to your wife? Francis took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to touch an still open wound. Bus accident 4 years ago. Marianne was only 3 years old. It was difficult, very difficult, but we moved forward. The conversation was interrupted by a prison guard informing that visiting time was over. Justice Herculane promised to expedite the procedures and left the prison with a renewed conviction of his mission. In the days that followed, the judge plunged into a frantic investigation. His chambers transformed into an improvised operations center. He requested all images from cameras near the pharmacy, demanded detailed reports from the cell towers in the region, and resummoned the witnesses who had identified Francis. More importantly, he requested an independent expert analysis of the video from Francis's home security camera. The result left no doubt. The recording was authentic with no signs of manipulation. The timestamp corresponded exactly to the date and time of the robbery, and the continuity of the images proved that Francis had been at home throughout the critical period. To complete the picture, Justice Herculane requested a discreet investigation into Detective Inspector Stone. The results were disturbing. A pattern of questionable conduct emerged, including other accusations of evidence manipulation and witness intimidation. Nothing that had led to serious punishments, but enough to establish a troubling profile. Crucial discovery came when a forensic technician identified an anomaly in the case documents. Francis's arrest report had been filed before the pharmacy investigation was completed. The document described details of the crime scene that, theoretically, could only be known after a full analysis. It was clear evidence that the report had been prepared in advance. Armed with this material, Justice Herculane officially filed for the reopening of the case and requested Francis's immediate release. The news spread quickly through the courthouse corridors, generating diverse reactions. Some praised the judge's integrity in admitting and correcting an error. Others, especially those close to Detective Inspector Stone, murmured about a justice who was losing his mind after the incident with the girl in court. The original prosecutor, Dr. Gustav Menzies, requested an urgent meeting with the justice, a personal friend of Detective Inspector Stone. He arrived at the judge's chambers visibly annoyed. Justice, with all due respect, you are making a very serious mistake, he declared, without mincing words. Reopening an already judged case without substantive new evidence is a dangerous precedent. I have new evidence, Doctor, the judge calmly replied, and the existing ones were deliberately ignored. A homemade video of dubious quality? Is that what you call evidence? The prosecutor exuded indignation. What about the witnesses who identified him? And the pharmacy camera footage? Witnesses can be mistaken, the justice argued. And as for the pharmacy image, you know as well as I do that the quality is terrible. It could be any man of Francis's height. The prosecutor approached the table, leaning intimidatingly. I'll be direct, Justice. You are throwing your reputation away because of this case. Not just yours, but the credibility of the entire judicial system. Do you really want to risk all this for a common suspect? For an innocent man, the judge corrected, remaining calm. And yes, I am willing to risk my reputation for the truth. The truth. The prosecutor let out a dry laugh. You are being manipulated by a child who invented a dramatic story to save her criminal father. And the most incredible thing is that you fell for this farce. The great Justice Herculane, known for his coldness and impartiality, suddenly believes in miracles because a girl placed her hands on his legs. The judge felt his face flush with anger, but he maintained his composure. Dr. Menzies, you are speaking to a magistrate. I suggest you moderate your tone. Or what? Will you prosecute me for contempt? The prosecutor shook his head, disbelieving. Everyone is talking about the judge who stood up for 5 seconds. You've become a joke in the courthouse corridors. And now you're jeopardizing the career of an exemplary detective because of this absurd obsession. Exemplary detective. Justice Herculane pushed a folder containing the documents he had gathered about Stone towards the prosecutor. Take a look at this before you so ardently defend your friend. The prosecutor opened the folder reluctantly and leafed through the documents. His face gradually lost color. This proves nothing. It proves enough to justify a formal investigation, the judge replied. And we have more. The arrest report was drafted before the forensic examination, with details that could only be known afterward. Explain that, Doctor. The prosecutor closed the folder forcefully. You won't get far with this. There are powerful interests protecting Detective Inspector Stone. Are you threatening me, prosecutor? I'm giving you friendly advice, he replied, heading for the door. Abandon this crusade while you still have a career to save. After the prosecutor left, Justice Herculane remained thoughtful. The veiled threats only reinforced his suspicion that something bigger was at play. But what could it be? Why such an effort to keep an innocent artisan in prison? That night, the judge had an idea. He needed to speak with Mary Ann again. The girl might have information that would help clarify the case. Besides, he felt a strange connection with the child since the incident in court. When he called the shelter, he received alarming news. Mary Ann had been temporarily transferred to the home of a social worker as part of the regular procedure for children awaiting the resolution of their parents' situation. Using his influence, the justice obtained the address. It was a simple house in the Meadowbrook neighborhood, a quiet residential area near the University of Sussex. He decided to go personally without warning, fearing that opposing forces might interfere if they knew of his visit. The social worker, Mrs. Helen, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a tired expression. She was visibly surprised to see the famous justice at her door, but quickly recovered and invited him in. Mary Ann is in the back bedroom, she explained. She has been an exemplary child despite the circumstances. Very polite, helpful, just a little too quiet. Does she know I'm trying to help her father? The judge asked. Yes, she does. It was the only thing that cheered her up these last few days. She has absolute trust in you, Justice. When Mary Ann entered the small room, her eyes lit up upon seeing the judge. Without ceremony, she approached and touched his hand in a gesture of familiarity that moved the justice. I knew you would come, she said, with the same adult seriousness she had shown in court. Did you find out more about my dad? Yes, Mary Ann, Justice Herculane replied, impressed by the girl's perception. I discovered that your father was a victim of a great injustice. I am working to free him as quickly as possible. The girl smiled, a luminous smile that seemed to light up the whole room. I knew it. I prayed a lot for it. Mrs. Helen observed the interaction with curiosity. I'll leave you two alone. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. When they were alone, the justice leaned forward in his wheelchair. Mary Ann, I need to ask you something important. Do you know if your father had any problems with Detective Inspector Stone before the robbery he was accused of? The girl's expression became serious. The bad man. What? That's what Daddy called him. The bad man. Mary Ann lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. Once he came to our house. Daddy told me to stay in my room, but I heard everything through the crack in the door. The judge felt his heart quicken. What did you hear, Mary Ann? The bad man wanted Daddy to pay money every month. He said it was for protection. Daddy replied that he was an honest artisan, had no money to spare and didn't need protection. The man got very angry, said Daddy would regret it. When did this happen? Shortly before Daddy was taken. The girl frowned, concentrating. I think it was 2 weeks before. Extortion. The missing piece of the puzzle fit perfectly. Detective Inspector Stone was extorting local merchants, and Francis had refused to pay. The setup for the robbery would be a form of revenge, and also a message to others who thought of resisting. Mary Ann, what you told me is very important. the justice said, gently holding the girl's hands. "It could be the key to freeing your father. Do you believe me?" "I believe you," he replied with conviction. "Just as I believed the video you showed me." The girl smiled again, but her smile soon disappeared. "Will the bad man let my dad out of prison?" "It no longer depends on him. I have already gathered enough evidence to challenge the entire case. Tomorrow there will be a special hearing for—" A crash interrupted the conversation. The back door of the house had been violently forced open. Mrs. Helen screamed in the kitchen. Justice Herculain pushed his chair back, instinctively placing himself between Mary Ann and the living room door. Seconds later, Detective Inspector Stone burst into the room, gun in hand and eyes bloodshot with fury. Behind him, Mrs. Helen, terrified, stammered apologies. "So this is where the great judge is conspiring," the detective roared, pointing the gun directly at the justice. "With a lying child." "Lower that weapon, detective," the judge ordered, keeping his voice firm despite his fear. "You're only making your situation worse." "My situation?" Stone let out a dry laugh. "My situation is already defined, Justice. You ensured that when you started sticking your nose where it didn't belong. Now all that's left is to minimize the damage." "Attacking a judge is a very serious crime," Justice Herculain warned. "Think about what you're doing." The detective took 2 steps forward. The gun barrel pointed firmly at the judge's chest. "What I'm doing is protecting my career. You will sign a document acknowledging that there was a procedural error that harmed the Taylor case, but maintaining the conviction. Then you will take a long medical leave." "Very long, understood?" Mary Ann, who until then had remained paralyzed with fear behind the wheelchair, suddenly ran towards the detective, throwing herself against his legs with all the force her small body could muster. The unexpected action made Stone momentarily lose his balance. The gun fired, but the shot hit the ceiling. Taking advantage of the distraction, Mrs. Helen grabbed a heavy decorative vase and threw it at the assailant, hitting him in the back. The detective staggered, cursing loudly, and turned furiously towards the two. "You wretches!" he shouted, regaining his position and pointing the gun again, now at Mary Ann. "I'll finish both of you first, then I'll deal with the judge." At that critical instant, Justice Herculain felt an intense heat course through his legs, followed by a powerful tingling, stronger than previously experienced. With no time to question what was happening, he propelled himself forward with his hands on the arms of the chair. To everyone's astonishment, including his own, the judge managed to stand up and take 3 wobbly steps towards the detective. The surprise was so great that Stone hesitated for a crucial second. Enough time for police sirens to sound outside, rapidly approaching. "The police!" exclaimed Mrs. Helen, relieved. "Thank goodness!" Detective Inspector Stone, realizing he was cornered, pointed the gun directly at the justice, who remained standing, unsteady but determined. "If I'm going down, you're coming with me, Judge." Mary Ann ran in front of the magistrate, placing herself as a human shield. "No, don't shoot him." Before the detective could react, the front door was knocked down and 3 police officers stormed the room, weapons drawn. "Police! Drop the weapon!" shouted the operation commander. Cornered, Detective Inspector Stone slowly lowered the gun and let it fall to the floor. In seconds, he was immobilized and handcuffed. How did you get here?" the justice asked, feeling his legs weaken again and leaning against the wall. "A neighbor heard the shot and called emergency services," explained one of the officers, helping the judge back into his wheelchair. He identified himself as Mr. Anthony, said he knew the justice and that there was a child in danger. Mary Ann hugged the judge tightly. "You stood up!" "You did it." "It was extraordinary," he murmured, still stunned by what had just happened. In the weeks that followed, events unfolded at an accelerated pace. Detective Inspector Stone, confronted with the evidence gathered by Justice Herculain, combined with the testimony of Mary Ann and Mrs. Helen about the armed invasion, ended up confessing his extortion scheme. Other merchants in the Pinehaven area, encouraged by the detective's downfall, came forward with similar accounts. Dr. Gustav Menzies, Stone's prosecutor friend, denied any involvement in the scheme but requested to be removed from the case for ethical reasons. An internal investigation was opened in the prosecutor's office to ascertain possible omissions. Finally, the big day arrived, the review hearing for Francis Taylor's case. The jury room was packed. Journalists, law students, ordinary citizens, everyone wanted to witness the outcome of a case that had gained county-wide notoriety. Francis entered the room escorted, but without handcuffs. Upon seeing Mary Ann in the first row, he smiled broadly. The girl, wearing a new blue dress, a gift from Mrs. Helen, could barely contain her excitement. A buzz ran through the hall when Justice Herculane entered. To general surprise, he was not in his usual wheelchair, but walking slowly, supported by a cane. His steps were uncertain but determined. Newspapers were already speculating about the miracle of the judge who walked again, but the justice himself avoided commenting on the matter, merely stating that he was undergoing experimental treatment. Seated in his place on the bench, the judge adjusted the microphone and addressed the room. This court convenes today to correct a grave miscarriage of justice for which I, Justice Anthony Herculane, assume full responsibility. Citizen Francis Taylor was unjustly convicted, based on manipulated evidence and irregular procedures conducted by former Detective Inspector Robert Stone, currently in custody and facing multiple charges. The judge then proceeded to enumerate the evidence that proved Francis's innocence, the authentic video from the security camera showing him at home at the time of the crime, the testimonies of neighbors confirming his presence, Detective Inspector Stone's confession about the manipulation of the case, the forensic reports with incompatible dates. In view of the foregoing, he solemnly concluded, I declare the previous sentence null and void and proclaim the innocence of Francis Taylor. All charges are withdrawn. The defendant is free of any guilt. The room erupted in applause. Francis covered his face with his hands, crying with relief. Mary Ann ran to hug him, jumping into his arms. Her father lifted her into the air, spinning her around as they both laughed and cried at the same time. When the commotion subsided, Justice Herculane still had an announcement to make. Furthermore, this court recognizes the moral and material damages suffered by Mr. Francis Taylor. Compensation will be determined in a separate process, and measures will be taken to ensure his immediate return to work and normal life with his daughter. More applause echoed through the hall. The judge pounded the gavel, officially closing the session. As everyone stood up, Mary Ann disentangled herself from her father's embrace and ran to the bench. Your Honor, she called out, her childlike voice cutting through the murmuring in the room. May I ask for one thing? Justice Herculane smiled at her genuinely. Of course, Mary Ann. You stood up that day to save my dad, she said, but you're still using a cane. Can I finish what I started? A reverent silence fell over the hall. The judge looked at Francis, who nodded, moved. Yes, Mary Ann, the justice replied, carefully descending from his bench. The girl knelt before him as she had done in the first trial. She placed her hands on his legs and closed her eyes. The entire room held its breath. God, she murmured with a clear voice, Your Honor stood up for the first time because of a promise. Now may he walk forever because of the truth. Justice Herculane felt an intense warmth coursing through his legs, rising up his spine. The familiar tingling returned, but this time with a revitalizing force he had never experienced. Slowly he released the cane. He stood upright for a moment and then took a step. Then another, and another. His movements, initially hesitant, gained firmness with each stride. The room watched in stunned silence. Some people cried. Others filmed with their cell phones. Most simply watched, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. The judge walked to Francis and extended his hand. I ask for forgiveness for the suffering I caused you and your daughter. The artisan squeezed the extended hand, tears in his eyes. You corrected your mistake. That's what matters. Mary Ann hugged the judge's legs, now firm and strong. I knew it. I knew you would do it. The justice bent down and hugged the girl. It wasn't you, Mary Ann, he said, his voice choked. It was God. You just asked in the right way. Days later, Brighton was talking not only about the judge who walked, again, but mainly about how a child's faith and a man's determination to correct his error had exposed a corruption scheme and saved an innocent person. Francis, back in his modest home in Pine Haven, reorganized his artisan tools while Mary Ann played in the small backyard. The phone rang. It was the artisan shop where he worked, offering his job back with a pay raise. The news of his innocence had spread and many wanted to help. The doorbell rang. Francis opened the door, surprised to find Justice Herculain standing without a cane holding a bouquet of daisies. "Daisies," Francis murmured, moved. "How did you know they were Claire's, my wife's favorites?" "It was in the case files," the judge replied. "I read about the accident." "I'm so sorry for your loss," Mary Ann ran from the backyard upon hearing the visitor's voice.
"Justice!"
"You came to visit us?" "I came to ask for forgiveness, officially," he said. "As a man, not just as a judge. I failed you." "The important thing is that you came back and fought for the truth," Francis replied without hesitation. "That's what matters." "Do you want to come in?" Mary Ann invited. "Daddy made hot chocolate." The justice smiled, accepting the invitation. The three entered the simple but welcoming house. While Francis served the chocolate, Mary Ann turned on an old radio, tuning into a station playing popular Brazilian music. "Let's dance," she exclaimed, pulling the judge by the hand. "To celebrate!" Laughing, Justice Herculain let the child lead him. Francis joined them, and the three danced awkwardly in the small living room, stumbling over furniture, laughing at their own clumsy steps. In the backyard, bathed in the golden light of the Brighton late afternoon, a judge who had walked again, a man unjustly accused, and a girl whose faith had moved mountains shared a moment of healing, as if each spin, each laugh, mended something that had been broken within them. The sun set over Pine Haven, casting orange hues over the River Ouse visible in the distance. In the small house, there was no longer condemnation, illness, or a wheelchair, just a child, a father, and a man transformed by faith, forgiveness, and above all, by the truth.